Nexus Point Station buzzed with the kind of controlled chaos that came from cramming 37 different species into a space designed by committee and managed by people whose primary qualification was an impressive ability to ignore problems until they became someone else's responsibility. Marcus Chen navigated the main concourse with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent 5 years inspecting cargo manifests and pretending that the contraband hidden in every third shipment wasn't his concern, as long as the paperwork looked sufficiently official. The crowd parted around something happening near the central plaza, and Marcus found himself drawn by the same morbid curiosity that made spacers slow down to watch ship crashes in progress. What he discovered was a spectacle that managed to combine public humiliation with interspecies politics, creating the kind of entertainment that made him wonder if civilization was really worth the effort required to maintain it. At the center of the gathering stood a Velter warrior, whose presence commanded attention in the way that natural disasters and military parades demanded respect through sheer intimidating force. Her crimson skin bore the silver streaks that marked her as a veteran of countless battles, while ritual scars traced patterns across her arms that told stories of victories earned with blade and blood. She stood perfectly still as her former comrades stripped away the insignia of rank and honor, each removed symbol hitting the deck plating with metallic sounds that echoed like funeral bells. "Kithara Bloodfang," announced Captain Thekmer, his scarred face displaying the kind of disapproval typically reserved for discovering insects in one's breakfast rations. "You have brought dishonor to the warrior caste through your uncontrolled savagery and refusal to follow proper combat protocols. Your berserker rages make you unfit to serve alongside disciplined soldiers, and your wild fighting style violates every principle of martial excellence our people have cultivated over centuries of honorable warfare." Marcus watched Kithara's expression remain perfectly neutral as her own warband publicly denounced her, though something in the set of her shoulders suggested she was calculating exactly how many of them she could kill before station security managed to stun her into unconsciousness. Her pointed ears twitched with predatory awareness, tracking the crowd's movements while her hand never strayed far from the weapons they hadn't yet confiscated. Furthermore, Thekmer continued with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoyed destroying other people's lives. "Your refusal to accept command authority and your tendency to prioritize civilian casualties over mission objectives demonstrate that you lack the discipline required for civilized warfare. You are hereby cast out from the warrior caste, forbidden to bear our colors, and declared unfit for military service with any respectable organization." The crowd of onlookers treated the ceremony like a sporting event, various species offering commentary and placing bets on whether the disgraced warrior would explode into violence or simply slink away like a whipped animal. Marcus noticed that even the station's security guards had positioned themselves for quick retreat, their crowd control equipment charged and ready for the kind of mayhem that seemed inevitable when you publicly humiliated someone whose primary skill involved creative applications of violence. But Kithara surprised everyone by remaining completely motionless as her former comrades completed their ritual of expulsion, accepting the ceremonial stripping of honor with the kind of deadly calm that made Marcus wonder if she was planning something spectacular, or simply demonstrating the kind of self-control that her accusers claimed she lacked. When Thekmer finished his denunciation and stepped back with the satisfied expression of someone who'd successfully disposed of an embarrassing problem, she finally spoke. "I accept your judgment," she said, her voice carrying the gravelly undertone that came from years of shouting battle commands over weapons, fire, and explosions. "Though I note that your definition of civilized warfare includes abandoning wounded civilians to save ammunition, and your concept of mission objectives prioritizes corporate profits over warrior honor." The crowd murmured with the kind of anticipation that suggested they were hoping for violence as entertainment, while Thekmer's expression darkened with the promise of escalating confrontation. Marcus found himself stepping forward before his conscious mind fully processed what he was doing, driven by the same impulse that had gotten him into trouble throughout his career, whenever he witnessed injustice masquerading as proper procedure. "Excuse me," he interrupted, his voice carrying the authority that came from 5 years of dealing with temperamental aliens and their various cultural complications. "But I couldn't help noticing that this ceremony violates several station regulations regarding public disturbances and potential incitement to violence." Every eye in the crowd turned to focus on the human who'd apparently decided to insert himself into alien warrior politics, while Kithara's predatory gaze assessed him with the intensity of someone trying to determine if he represented an opportunity or simply another form of threat. Marcus realized that he just volunteered himself for the kind of adventure that usually ended with people writing very unflattering obituaries about his judgment and survival instincts. Thekmer's scarred features arranged themselves into an expression of contempt that suggested humans ranked somewhere below parasitic insects in his estimation of galactic life forms. "Human, this is a matter of warrior honor that does not concern your soft-skinned species. I suggest you return to your cargo manifests and leave matters of combat discipline to those qualified to understand them." "Actually," Marcus replied with the cheerful persistence that had made him legendary among station bureaucrats for his ability to find regulations that complicated everyone's day. "As a certified cargo inspector with diplomatic liaison credentials, I'm required to investigate any situation that might affect station security or interspecies relations. And publicly humiliating armed warriors seems like exactly the kind of thing that might escalate into the sort of incident that requires lengthy paperwork and uncomfortable conversations with my supervisors." Kithara's expression shifted slightly, revealing what might have been amusement beneath the predatory stillness. "The human speaks wisdom, Captain. Perhaps you should consider whether your honor ceremony is worth explaining to station administrators who prefer their diplomatic incidents to remain fictional." The standoff dissolved into the kind of frustrated grumbling that occurred when bureaucratic technicalities interfered with personal vendettas, though Marcus noticed that several Velter warriors looked like they were calculating whether killing a human inspector would create more problems than it solved. As the crowd dispersed with the disappointed air of people cheated out of expected entertainment, he found himself facing a warrior whose reputation for violence was matched only by her newly acquired status as a galactic outcast. The lower levels of Nexus Point existed in a parallel universe where the station's polished corporate facade gave way to the honest squalor of people living on the margins of galactic civilization. Marcus descended through maintenance corridors and forgotten storage areas with the confidence of someone whose job had required him to inspect every corner of the massive structure, his credentials opening doors that remained mysteriously sealed to most visitors. He found Kithara in what had once been a cargo bay, now converted into living space by someone who understood that privacy was a luxury worth more than comfort in a place where everything was monitored and recorded for the convenience of corporate security. The space managed to be both Spartanly functional and oddly welcoming, equipped with a bedroll, a compact cooking unit, and an arsenal that could outfit a small military expedition, all arranged with the efficiency of someone accustomed to rapid deployment in hostile environments. She was sharpening her weapons with mechanical precision, each blade receiving the kind of attention usually reserved for religious ceremonies, while her predatory awareness tracked his approach with the intensity of someone calculating threat assessments and escape routes. Her living arrangements suggested a warrior who'd learned to find home in places where most people saw only abandonment and decay. "Inspector Chen," she said without looking up from her blade maintenance, her voice carrying the gravelly undertone that came from years of shouting commands over weapons fire, You either possess remarkable courage or terminal stupidity. I'm curious which category applies to a human who follows exiled warriors into the forgotten corners of space stations. Marcus settled onto a supply crate that had been repurposed as furniture, noting that she'd positioned everything to provide clear sight lines to all entrances while maintaining easy access to her weapons. Actually, I prefer to think of it as professional curiosity combined with a dangerous tendency toward helping people who probably don't need my assistance. Helping. She tested the word like she was tasting something unfamiliar, her pointed ears twitching with what might have been amusement. And what form would this help take? Credits, transportation off station. Or perhaps you're one of those humans who collects exotic aliens like some species collect decorative crystals. None of the above, Marcus replied, pulling out a thermos of coffee and offering her a cup with the casual gesture of someone who'd learned that sharing food was a universal diplomatic protocol. I witnessed what happened up there, and I'm familiar enough with bureaucratic character assassination to recognize injustice when it's wearing official uniforms. Kithara accepted the coffee with suspicious grace, sniffing it with the caution of someone whose survival had depended on detecting poisons and other unpleasant surprises. You know nothing about Velter warrior culture, human. What appears to be injustice to your soft-skinned sensibilities might be necessary discipline for maintaining combat effectiveness among species whose lives depend on absolute trust in their battle brothers. Maybe, Marcus conceded, watching as she took an experimental sip and discovered that human coffee was apparently compatible with alien physiology. But I've seen enough power struggles disguised as moral outrage to recognize the difference between discipline and elimination of inconvenient opposition. Your former captain had the look of someone who'd found a convenient excuse to remove a problem, rather than address its underlying causes. Something shifted in Kithara's expression, a crack in the predatory stillness that revealed the person beneath the warrior's trained intimidation. You're perceptive for a cargo inspector. Most humans see only the violence and assume that makes us simple creatures driven by bloodlust and territorial aggression. Most humans haven't spent 5 years mediating disputes between species whose idea of friendly conversation involves displaying their weapons collections, Marcus replied, settling more comfortably on his improvised seat. I've learned that the most dangerous people are usually the ones with the best reasons for their actions, even when those actions look insane to outside observers. Their conversation evolved from wary testing to something approaching genuine dialogue, as Kithara discovered that Marcus possessed the rare ability to listen without immediately offering solutions, while he learned that her fearsome reputation masked someone who'd never experienced unconditional kindness. She spoke of a warrior culture that valued conformity over innovation, where her instinctive fighting style had been condemned as primitive savagery, despite its effectiveness in situations where traditional tactics would have resulted in unnecessary casualties. The Velter way teaches that true warriors fight with disciplined precision, she explained, her scarred hands moving through combat forms with unconscious grace. Measured strikes, coordinated tactics, and absolute obedience to command structure. My approach is different. When battle is joined, I become something other than a controlled soldier following predetermined patterns. Marcus nodded, recognizing the frustration of someone whose natural talents didn't fit established categories. In my experience, the people who get labeled as uncontrollable are usually the ones who have figured out solutions that the system isn't ready to accept. Innovation always looks like chaos to people who have invested their careers in maintaining the status quo. You speak as though you understand exile, Kithara observed, her violet eyes studying him with newfound interest. Have you also been cast out by your own people for refusing to conform to acceptable limitations? Not exactly cast out, Marcus admitted, but I've definitely been transferred to positions where my tendency to ask inconvenient questions couldn't embarrass anyone important. Cargo inspection on a remote station is where the corporate hierarchy sends people who are too useful to fire but too problematic to promote. The admission created a moment of connection that transcended species differences. Two individuals who'd found themselves on the margins of their respective societies for refusing to accept that efficiency was more important than ethics. As the station's artificial day cycle progressed toward evening, their conversation revealed depths that neither had expected to find in someone from such a different world. "Inspector Chen," Kithara said as he prepared to leave, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been gratitude, "your visit today was unexpected. Most beings who approach me want something specific, either to eliminate a threat or acquire a weapon. You appear to want nothing more than conversation with someone your people would consider a dangerous predator." "Sometimes," Marcus replied, standing and collecting his thermos. "The most dangerous thing in the galaxy is assuming that you understand someone based on their reputation rather than their character. I'll be back tomorrow if you don't mind the company of a bureaucrat with questionable judgment and an unlimited supply of coffee." Her laughter carried a note of genuine warmth that transformed her fearsome features into something almost approachable. "I would welcome such company, Inspector. It has been refreshing to speak with someone who listens without immediately calculating how my words might be used against me." Marcus's daily visits to the lower levels had become routine over the following weeks, transforming from cautious diplomacy into something resembling friendship, though he suspected that Kithara's definition of friendship involved considerably more potential violence than most humans would consider comfortable. Their conversations ranged from philosophy to practical survival, with frequent detours into the kind of dark humor that came from spending time with someone whose professional skills involved creative applications of sharp objects. "Your species fascinates me," Kithara said during one of their morning coffee sessions. Her latest weapon maintenance project spread across a makeshift table constructed from salvaged cargo containers. "Humans appear soft and vulnerable, yet you consistently place yourselves in situations that would challenge experienced warriors. It suggests either remarkable courage or evolutionary defects in your survival instincts." Marcus laughed, settling into what had become his regular seat on a supply crate that had been upgraded with a cushion, salvaged from some merchant's abandoned luxury goods. "I prefer to think of it as optimistic stubbornness, combined with a dangerous belief that most problems can be solved through persistent application of bureaucratic procedures." Their developing friendship faced its first serious test when Marcus's information networks revealed disturbing patterns in station security reports. Several criminal organizations had begun making inquiries about the exiled Velter warrior, while corrupt security officers discussed the potential profits from either recruiting or eliminating someone whose skills were legendary, but whose protective status was non-existent. "They see you as either a valuable asset or a dangerous loose cannon," Marcus explained, reviewing the intelligence reports on his portable datapad, while Kithara continued sharpening her collection of implements that were definitely not legal under most civilized weapons regulations. "The Crimson Syndicate wants to recruit you for their enforcement division, while the Nexus Liberation Front considers you a potential threat to their smuggling operations." Kithara's expression remained neutral, though her hand movements became more precise as she tested the edge of a curved blade that looked like it could slice through armor plating. "And what does the human inspector recommend? Should I flee to another station, accept employment with criminals, or simply eliminate the problem through direct application of violence?" "Actually," Marcus said with the kind of careful tone that suggested he was about to Kithara Bloodfang, he announced, his voice carrying the synthetic undertones that came from vocal cord replacements designed to sound more intimidating than nature had originally provided. "I'm Vex Carlin, operations director for the Crimson Syndicate. We have a proposition that could benefit both parties, assuming you're interested in earning credits through the application of your legendary combat skills. Kithara rose with fluid grace, her movement transforming her from someone engaged in casual maintenance into a predator assessing potential threats. And if I'm not interested in your proposition, Mr. Carlin, do you withdraw gracefully, or does this conversation become a demonstration of why most people avoid disturbing exiled warriors in their chosen hiding places? Carlin's augmented features arranged themselves into what was probably meant to be a charming smile, but looked more like a mechanical malfunction expressing dental aggression. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, warrior. The Syndicate prefers cooperative partnerships to hostile acquisitions, though we're prepared for either possibility. Marcus stood slowly, his hand moving toward the emergency beacon that would summon station security, though he suspected that backup might arrive too late to prevent the kind of violence that would require extensive cleanup and uncomfortable explanations to his supervisors. Gentlemen, I should point out that this area is under corporate jurisdiction, and any unauthorized business negotiations require proper permits and diplomatic oversight. The human has a point, Kithara said, her tone carrying the kind of deceptive reasonableness that experienced warriors use just before eliminating problems with extreme prejudice. Perhaps you should return with proper documentation before attempting to conduct illegal recruitment activities in restricted areas. What followed was the kind of tense standoff that occurred when people with conflicting interests discovered that violence might be expensive for everyone involved. Carlin's associates shifted position to optimize firing angles, while Kithara moved with predatory grace that suggested she was calculating exactly how quickly she could eliminate 3 armed opponents in confined space. The confrontation resolved when station security finally responded to Marcus's beacon, arriving in sufficient numbers to make immediate violence economically unwise for all parties involved. Carlin withdrew with the kind of gracious threats that promised future complications, while Marcus found himself explaining to Security Chief Rodriguez why his routine inspection duties had somehow involved armed criminals attempting to recruit exiled alien warriors in the station's lower levels. "Chen," Rodriguez said with the weary tone of someone who'd spent years dealing with Marcus's tendency to discover problems that required official attention, "your ability to find trouble in routine situations is becoming legendary among the administrative staff. Please tell me you're not planning to adopt any more dangerous aliens as unofficial diplomatic projects." "Chief Rodriguez," Marcus replied with his most innocent expression, "I'm simply providing cultural liaison services to ensure that interspecies relations remain stable and profitable for all concerned parties. It's purely a matter of maintaining station security through proactive community outreach." As security completed their reports and departed with warnings about conducting unauthorized business in restricted areas, Kithara approached Marcus with an expression that combined gratitude and amusement in proportions that suggested she was genuinely touched by his intervention. "You risked your career to protect someone most people would consider an expendable alien criminal," she observed, her violet eyes reflecting something that might have been the beginning of trust. "Either you're remarkably stupid, or you possess the kind of honor that my people claim to value but rarely demonstrate." Marcus grinned, collecting his datapad and preparing to return to the endless paperwork that comprised his official duties. "Probably both, but I've learned that the most interesting people are usually the ones everyone else thinks are too dangerous to approach. Tomorrow I'll bring better coffee, and we can discuss whether there are any regulations that might prevent future recruitment visits." Their friendship had survived its first test, though Marcus suspected that their enemies would return with better planning and fewer scruples about conducting business through violence rather than negotiation. The conspiracy against Kithara finally revealed itself with the kind of elaborate planning that suggested several intelligent people had invested considerable time in developing ways to eliminate one exiled warrior without triggering inconvenient investigations. Marcus discovered the plot through his network of informants, maintenance workers, and overpaid security guards who'd learned that selling information to cargo inspectors was safer than blackmailing criminals with anger management issues. They've coordinated their efforts, he explained during their morning coffee session, spreading surveillance photos and intercepted communications across Kithara's improvised table. The Crimson Syndicate, corrupt station security, and your former warband have formed what can only be described as the galaxy's most unlikely alliance, united by their shared desire to eliminate you permanently. Kithara studied the evidence with professional interest, her scarred fingers tracing connections between various factions, while her predatory mind calculated threat assessments and potential responses. Impressive organization for people who claim I'm nothing more than an uncontrolled savage. Though I note that Captain Thekmer appears to be receiving payments from both criminal organizations and several corporations that prefer their security contracts to remain unexamined. Which explains why you were really exiled, Marcus observed, recognizing the familiar pattern of whistleblowers being eliminated through bureaucratic assassination. You weren't cast out for fighting wild. You were removed because you discovered that your own people were profiting from the kind of contracts that compromise warrior honor for corporate convenience. The revelation transformed their understanding of her situation from personal tragedy to systemic corruption, explaining why her former comrades had been so eager to brand her as uncontrollable rather than addressing her accusations about their profitable relationship with organizations that specialized in morally questionable security services. Their enemies moved with coordinated precision that would have been admirable if it weren't directed at eliminating someone Marcus had grown to consider a friend, whose loyalty was worth more than his comfortable career prospects. Station security arrived at Kithara's hideout with falsified arrest warrants, while syndicate operatives positioned themselves to ensure that she disappeared permanently during transfer to detention facilities. Kithara Bloodfang, announced Security Lieutenant Hayes, his nervous demeanor suggesting he understood exactly how dangerous it was to arrest someone whose reputation for violence wasn't entirely based on exaggeration. You're under arrest for violation of station weapons regulations, unlawful habitation of restricted areas, and conspiracy to commit acts of terrorism against corporate interests. Marcus stepped forward with his credentials and a legal brief that he'd spent the previous night researching with the desperate intensity of someone whose friend's life depended on finding obscure regulations that could complicate official misconduct. Lieutenant Hayes, I'm afraid those charges violate several interspecies diplomatic protocols, and the arrest warrant appears to have been issued without proper oversight from the Colonial Administration Bureau. Inspector Chen, Hayes replied with the kind of strained politeness that suggested he'd received explicit instructions about handling inconvenient bureaucrats. This is a security matter that doesn't fall under cargo inspection jurisdiction. I suggest you step aside and allow us to proceed with lawful detention procedures. What followed was the kind of legal and physical confrontation that occurred when bureaucratic technicalities collided with organized corruption, backed by people whose problem-solving methods emphasized finality over due process. Marcus deployed every regulation, procedure, and diplomatic protocol he'd learned during 5 years of mediating disputes between species whose cultural differences included radically different approaches to conflict resolution. Kithara proved that her reputation for violence was entirely justified when 3 syndicate operatives attempted to eliminate the terrorist threat through direct action, transforming the detention area into a demonstration of why most people avoided confronting exiled Velter warriors in confined spaces. Her fighting style was indeed wild, but it was the calculated wildness of someone who'd learned to adapt to any situation through creative application of available resources, including environmental features that most people wouldn't consider weapons. The battle resolved when Marcus's call to colonial administration finally produced representatives who understood that arresting people without proper oversight was the kind of mistake that resulted in very uncomfortable conversations with diplomatic liaisons and internal affairs investigators. The arrival of actual authority figures with legitimate credentials caused the conspiracy to collapse like a house of cards built on criminal incompetence and bureaucratic overreach. "Inspector Chen," said Administrator Walsh as corrupt security officers were led away in restraints that had originally been intended for Kithara, "your intervention has uncovered a network of corruption that extends far beyond simple criminal recruitment. We'll be conducting a full investigation of all security contracts and personnel assignments, with particular attention to any arrangements that might compromise station neutrality." In the aftermath of their victory, Marcus found himself facing a choice between returning to his comfortable routine of cargo manifests and safety regulations, or accepting an offer that would transform his career into something considerably more dangerous and infinitely more meaningful. "The colonial administration has offered me a position as special liaison for interspecies relations," he explained to Kithara as they sat in her converted cargo bay, sharing coffee and processing the reality that they'd successfully defeated an elaborate conspiracy through the combined application of bureaucratic persistence and creative violence. It would involve traveling to various stations and colonies, investigating disputes, and ensuring that diplomatic protocols are followed properly. Kithara's smile carried the kind of warmth that transformed her fearsome features into something genuinely approachable, revealing the person who'd been hidden beneath years of necessary intimidation. "And you're wondering whether an exiled warrior with a reputation for uncontrolled violence would be interested in serving as your cultural advisor and security specialist." "The thought had occurred to me," Marcus admitted, grinning as he realized that their partnership had evolved from cautious friendship into something that felt like destiny disguised as career advancement. "Though I should warn you that government work involves considerably more paperwork and significantly fewer opportunities for creative violence." Kithara's laughter echoed through the converted cargo bay, a sound that carried genuine joy instead of the predatory amusement that most people associated with her reputation. "Marcus Chen, you've taught me that there are many forms of strength, and that the fiercest battles aren't always won with blades and bloodshed. I would be honored to stand beside someone brave enough to fight bureaucracy with the same courage that warriors bring to physical combat." Their partnership became official 3 weeks later, when Administrator Walsh signed documents that created the galaxy's first interspecies cultural mediation team, complete with credentials that allowed them to investigate disputes, enforce diplomatic protocols, and generally interfere with situations that required both legal expertise and the kind of intimidation factor that came from traveling with someone whose reputation preceded them like a warning label. "Our first assignment," Marcus announced, reviewing their travel orders while Kithara packed her weapons with the efficient grace of someone who'd learned that preparation was the difference between survival and becoming a cautionary tale, "involves mediating a territorial dispute between mining corporations and indigenous populations on Kepler-7. Apparently, the situation has escalated beyond normal diplomatic channels, and they believe that a human bureaucrat and an exiled warrior can succeed where trained diplomats have failed." Kithara asked, securing her arsenal in containers that were diplomatically labeled as cultural artifacts and ceremonial equipment, to avoid uncomfortable questions from customs officials. Marcus smiled as he watched her transform from someone society had labeled as uncontrollably violent into a professional who happened to possess skills that made most problems solvable through the mere suggestion that alternative solutions might involve significantly more excitement than anyone wanted to experience. "They believe," he replied, sealing their travel documents and preparing to leave Nexus Point for destinations that promised new challenges and the kind of adventures that made cargo inspection seem like a peaceful retirement hobby. "That sometimes the best way to solve impossible problems is to send people who don't know enough to recognize that the solutions they're considering should be impossible." As their transport departed the station, carrying them toward a galaxy full of disputes that required both diplomatic finesse and the credible threat of consequences for unreasonable behavior, Marcus reflected that the most rewarding partnerships were often forged between people who complemented each other's strengths, rather than simply sharing similar backgrounds or comfortable assumptions about how problems should be solved. Kithara settled into her seat with the satisfied expression of someone who discovered that home wasn't a place you were born or a society that accepted you, but rather the person who chose to stand beside you when everyone else considered you too dangerous to approach. Their friendship had survived exile, corruption, and bureaucratic warfare, proving that the strongest bonds were built not through shared heritage, but through shared choices about what kind of people they wanted to become. "Marcus," she said as the stars wheeled past their viewport, carrying them toward new worlds and fresh opportunities to prove that understanding could triumph over prejudice. "I believe this partnership will be quite educational for everyone involved." "Kithara," he replied, grinning as he contemplated the adventures that awaited two individuals who'd learned that the galaxy's most interesting solutions usually came from the least expected combinations. "I have a feeling we're going to redefine what people think they know about diplomacy, justice, and the proper way to handle disputes between beings who have forgotten that cooperation is more profitable than conflict." Their laughter echoed through the transport as it jumped to hyperspace, carrying the galaxy's newest diplomatic team toward challenges that would test whether friendship forged in exile could indeed bridge any divide, no matter how impossible it initially appeared.